Okay.
Hold on. I don't
You're
want
gonna
to flash.
strip on my stream.
I don't want to flash. Don't want to.
Tell me what happened.
Huh?
Tell me what happened.
I don't. I don't remember where we left off.
Function.
Yeah, he did.
Why
Is
did he
that?
ditch? Yeah, that's the last we read.
Oh God. Because Shalian told him to. He's going through some insane grief for
Yeah.
himself right now. Get
Yeah.
him.
He came back from his trauma,
um.
immediately gets decked by Function. Function knocks him down and didn't even realize he would be able to knock him down. Chilean just gets back up again.
Yeah.
Then he goes out busking with him, beats up a guy, calls him a peasant. Function's like, what the fuck? They go back home.
Did he
Um,
kill the guy or just beat him up?
he beat him up, like, to the point that he was coughing up blood, but he didn't kill him.
Hmm.
Um, they go back home. He refuses his mother's meal. He goes and steals from. He refuses his mother meal, and then he like runs out of the house. And he's like, "I'll do everyone a favor by just disappearing." And he goes and steals like a bunch of gold from a rich house, and then Function's like, "Why have I followed you all this time?" And he's like, "Don't follow me anymore." And so he leaves, and he's really sad about it. And he's like, deep down, he wishes that he would have stayed despite him telling him to leave and would have stayed with him in his lowest points. And then he talks to his mother, and he's like, "Go." His mother's like, "Go get Function back," and the king is like, "Go get Function back," and he's like, "No, I'm not gonna do that." And then we have the whole scene where he wakes up and he's like, "Why did Function not wake me up? Why is it so quiet?" And then he goes into his parents' room. His parents are hanging from his silk band, and he starts to go crazy. He bashes his head against the wall. He's screaming, he's laughing, he's crying. He's like, "Function, my parents are dead," but no one was listening. Royer finally gains sentience after he tries to hang himself. He eats all of his mother's cold food that she left out. Um, Even though it's horrific, he hears drum beats and horns, and it's the kingdom celebrating the new kingdom of Yong'an. And he is filled with so much hatred for these people that he dresses in a white funeral garb, like the White No Face, and he puts on a White No Face mask, and he goes to the battlefield outside the capital where all of these ghosts and spirits are just like negative energy just like floating around with all these corpses. And he's like, do you hate, and he starts riling up these spirits, and he has Royer tied on his arm, and he's like thinking about how White No Face told him how to cause human face disease, and it's with resentful spirits. So he's riling up these spirits, and then at the end, he hears a voice, and it's um here, I'll read it. Suddenly, the white-clothed man heard a young man's voice. "Your Highness." He looked back, only to find that a black-clad young man was already standing there, and then the young man bowed his head and bent one knee to the ground. Now we're on chapter 102. White-clothed ghost appoints black warrior as general. Based on his voice and physique, he was determined to be a young man in quotes. He was dressed in neat and orderly warrior gear, his physique tall and slender. Like new, fresh bamboo, he had an aura of the innocence of youth. Robes as black as ink, hair as black as ink, tied high. From his waist hung a saber, long and slim. He raised his head slowly, and upon his face there was a snow-white mask, painted, with a crescent-eyed smile. Ball after ball of black mist took shape amidst all the hissing and wailing, which were all sucked cleanly into the array within the white-clothed man's chunkan sleeve. It was like he took an entire river into a small jade bottle. As for the young man, he remained steady and still within the chaotic black whirlwind. "Who are you calling?" the white-clothed man asked. The black-clad young man was still down on one knee. The pose was one of servile submission, but also of swearing an oath. "I was calling you, your Royal Highness." "I'm not your Royal Highness," the white-clothed man said coldly. "You are," the black-clad young man replied. "I would never forget your voice or your form." The white-clothed man's voice was now laced with anger. "I told you I'm not him." The white-clothed man was naturally Chilian, who had donned the funeral garb and put on the crying, smiling mask. No one could recognize him with his face hidden behind the mask, and he didn't want to be recognized. And yet, on this battlefield, a wandering black-clad warrior had identified him straight away. Suddenly the white silk band wrapped inside Chilian's expansive sleeve lunged like a viper at the black-clad young man. Although it looked like a soft white cloth at first glance, it was savage when it attacked, and its evil chi burst forth. But just as the black-clad young man was about to be wrapped and bound, he reached out and firmly caught the white silk band. One end of the white silk band was wrapped around Chilian's wrist, and the other was caught around the wrist of this black-clad young man. The silk band was gradually pulling itself taut. It was trying to break away, but the black-clad young man had a tight hold on it, like he was squeezing a venomous snake at its fatal point. Chilling chi flowed endlessly from his hand. There was no doubt that this was the soul of the dead, and it was an extremely powerful one. Chilian could tell that the strength passing through the white band was not to be underestimated. "What is your name?" He remained silent for a moment. Then the black-clad young man replied, "I do not have a name." Chilian didn't push further. "No name would make you Wu Ming." Wu Ming literally means nameless. "You may call me whatever you desire," Wu Ming said. "Are you a soul of this battlefield's dead?" "I am." Only then did Chilian slacken his attack. The white silk band instantly leapt back to Chilian, swaying at Wu Ming to show off its might from afar, like it was lashing a venomous tongue. If he was a soul who had died in the battle, no wonder he had heeded Chilian's call. This black-clad warrior must have also been filled with resentment towards the people of Yong'an. In other words, he could be used because their objective was the same. Thus, Chilian said, "Then follow me." He extended his hand to Wu Ming. "I will give you what you want." Wu Ming's face was also hidden behind a mask, so his expression couldn't be seen. They were indeed the same. After a moment of silence, he grasped Chilian's extended hand with conviction, bowed his head deeply, and pressed his cold forehead to the back of Chilian's fingers. A long moment later, he vowed sincerely, "I swear to die following your highness." Chilian, however, pulled back his hand and tucked his arms into his sleeves. He turned around and said coolly, "You're already dead. Come." Wu Ming rose to his feet, and when Chilian looked back, he discovered that the young man was much bigger than he had expected. He was probably only around 16 or 17 years old, but was enormously tall already. He was even a bit taller than Chilian. That was unimportant, though, and Chilian only took a glance before turning back around and continuing onward. Chilian took the lead, and the nameless black-clad warrior followed right behind, as expected. "Your Highness, where do you want to go?" Chilian gazed into the distance. "The Palace of Yong'an." And let me send the picture of him swearing to die for him. The Palace of Yong'an sat in a large city to the west. It was once a flourishing city in its own right, but it had been overshadowed by the imperial city of Shenle in the east. Now that Shenle had fallen, the new king had moved the capital here. It wouldn't be long before it overtook the old imperial city, basking in its newfound glory. Shilian arrived at the new imperial city deep in the night. Beneath the moonlight, he was like a white cat soundlessly flying across the ridges of the densely packed rooftops, and Wu Ming was like a black spirit fox, following closely behind. Soon the two shadows landed before a large gate. Shilian sensed something amiss. There was faintly ominous air surrounding the gate, and he paused. He was about to reach out to check it when Wu Ming stepped in front of him. The black-clad man extended an open palm and said quietly, "Break!" A line of firelight leaked from around the edges of the door, as if something had been burnt away. Only after that did Wu Ming reach out and push the gate open. "Your Highness." Hold on, let me get my water bottle. I forgot it downstairs.
Oh,
Okay. Shilian crossed the threshold and looked at the ground. Just as he
you're not connected.
Oh no. The horror.
The whore.
The whore. Shilian crossed the threshold and looked at the ground. Just as he expected, there were some burnt shreds scattered there. Shilian picked up a bit of it to inspect, and he smelled the scent of herbs and talisman paper. He stole a glance at Wu Ming. This ghost was indeed formidable. These were the burnt remnants of charms, which obviously indicated there was someone on the other side of the door who had woven a defense spell. A strong one. If ordinary little minions tried to intrude or break the array, their innards would have been burnt to ashes. Yet it only took this black-clad warrior an instant to destroy it completely. Perhaps because it was newly erected, the palace of Yong'an wasn't extraordinarily magnificent. It was even a little shabby. It couldn't be compared to the palace of Shenle. But that wasn't the strange part. The truly strange thing about this building was the massive number of evil warding traps and defense arrays set up throughout the palace. Still, every time Shilian noticed something blocking the way, Wu Ming would immediately step forward and break through the obstacle to clear the path for him. In the end, his journey was entirely unimpeded. An hour later, two tall, slender shadows kept watch from the roof ridge of the palace of Yong'an's largest great hall. They both wore masks. The white-clothed man's expansive sleeves fluttered, and the white silk band wrapped around his arm danced madly in the wind. The black-clad man was sleek and agile, and wore a long saber at his waist. He kept guard at the white-clothed man's side, gazing in the same direction as he did. This scene under the moonlight was somehow at once dangerous, uncanny, and beautifully harmonious. The newly crowned king of Yong'an was inside this great hall. Shilian snorted. He set up so many obstacles in his palace to ward off evil. It seems he's quite scared that something will come knocking, huh? Your Highness, I will open the path, Wu Ming said. However, Shilian stopped him. No need, I'll do it myself. Then he leapt down like a white blossom blown off the tip of a branch by a breeze, and landed soundlessly before the palace hall. Just as he was about to push open the gates, he heard a baby's wailing from within. Longying didn't have any consorts, and his son had died a long time ago. Where had this baby come from? Shilian didn't care, though. Never mind a baby. He wouldn't be afraid if it was an army of millions that was hidden inside. He raised his leg and kicked open the palace door. Strangely, there was only one person within the great hall. There was not a single other soul present, and certainly no baby. When the lone person saw who had arrived, he raised his head. "You've come. I've been searching for you." The one within the palace was Long Ying. Although he was now an esteemed king, he wasn't dressed in lavish robes, and he sat woodenly upon the throne. Shilian was puzzled for a moment at his reaction, but then he realized that he was wearing a mask and a funeral garb. Long Ying had taken him for White No-Face. There were arrays set up within the palace hall as well, and when Shilian crossed the threshold, he could sense something blocking him from approaching further. However, it only took putting a little more force into his steps for him to easily walk forward into the hall. The sound of something shattering ran out. Night and the chill of winter came pouring in from outside the palace hall, filling Shilian's sleeves with wild winds. "Why were you searching for me?" he asked gloomily. When he heard Shilian's voice, Long Ying's expression changed slightly. "It's you?" Although Shilian approached slowly, his snow-white boots advancing across the icy stone floors step by step. "It is I." Long Ying, a brutish commoner, had led an army and destroyed Shenle. With the kingly aura surrounding his body, ordinary evil couldn't come close to him. However, Shilian had brought with him millions of souls of the battlefield's dead. He refused to believe that Long Ying would be able to defend himself against so many ghosts that bore him such powerful resentment. The vengeful spirits were agitated and impatient, ready to break free and seize the fresh new flesh of their enemy as a host. It was impossible for anyone not to have heard their roiling, but Long Ying didn't look particularly alarmed. "You've come to kill me?" Shilian didn't answer. In the blink of an eye, he appeared right in front of Long Ying and grabbed him by the hair, yanking him down and pressing him to the ground. Success. Under the crying, smiling mask, Shilian's lips unconsciously curled upward. He knew it. He knew it. He could now defeat Long Ying. His heavenly official status had once restricted Shilian and made him powerless before this man with a king's fortune. But now Shilian was stripped of such bondage, and had thrown away his godly state, and he could finally defeat Long Ying. Shilian's heart was pounding, and he was just about to move on to the next step when his face dropped abruptly. "What's that sound?" "Wah, wah." He heard a tiny baby's cry again, but there was clearly no baby within the great hall. He listened again. This wasn't right. The crying was coming from Long Ying, who was currently subdued under his hand. Or more accurately, it was coming from somewhere on Long Ying's body. Shilian ripped off Long Ying's robe, and his eyes widened. He jumped to his feet. "What is this?" Long Ying slowly rolled over and sat up. "Don't be scared." His words weren't directed at Shilian, but the thing attached to his body. There were two distinct faces growing on Long Ying's chest, like protruding tumors. Each one was about the same size as a normal human's face. The larger face was elegant and beautiful, and easily identifiable as a woman. The smaller face was slightly scrunched up, like a baby's. The halting cries had been coming from the baby's mouth. Human face disease. Shilian was dumbfounded. "How did you get infected with human face disease?" "This isn't human face disease," Long Ying said. "How is it not? What is it then?" Shilian exclaimed. "This is my wife and my son," Long Ying explained. "They're not a disease." His voice was soft as he raised his hands to gently caress the two faces on his body, truly looking like a husband and father soothing his wife and child. However, the two faces couldn't even open their eyes. They could only open their mouths to cry and sob. They had the shape of humans, but they were not human at all. A moment later, Long Ying looked up. "Where's White No-Face?" "He said my wife would return if I did this, but it's been so long now. How come she still can't talk? What's going on? Tell him to come find me, quick!" Hearing this, Shilian understood. "You let White No-Face plant the vengeful spirits of your wife and son on your body?" So that was it. All the spells and arrays in the palace weren't to impede intruders from outside to prevent the escape of the things hidden within. but to prevent the escape of the things hidden within. Long Ying, who had already become king, was using his own flesh and blood to secretly raise these two vengeful spirits. Shi Lian had come to seek vengeance, yet who could have guessed that he wouldn't need to do anything? Long Ying had already infected himself with human face disease. These two faces must have been on his body for a long time now. They had grown tiny, deformed arms and legs that drooped heavily off of him in a disturbing display. Moreover, they had already sucked their host dry. Long Ying's ribs were abnormally visible, his gut was shrunken in, and his skin was wax yellow. He looked wan and sallow, like he didn't have much longer to live. He was no longer the same brave, fierce warrior he'd been on the battlefield. It seemed he hadn't been living well, despite winning the war and becoming a king. But Shi Lian didn't feel gratified at all, and he seized Long Ying. "What kind of a joke is this?" he exclaimed angrily. He didn't even get the chance to take his enemy's life. His enemy was about to die on his own. What the hell? What should he do now? Something tumbled off Long Ying as Shi Lian grabbed him. It shimmered and glinted red as it bounced and rolled away. Long Ying clutched Shi Lian's hands. Even such a simple gesture seemed quite difficult for him. "Pearl. That pearl," he panted. Shi Lian looked over. Rolling on the floor was the red coral pearl earring he had once given to Long Ying. "I've always wanted to say this to you. Thank you for the pearl," Long Ying said. Hearing this surprised Shi Lian. He never expected Long Ying to say that so suddenly. Something in his heart was about to be unburied, but he forced it down. "You!" "Things would have been better if you'd given it to me sooner, though," Long Ying said softly. "Too bad." Before he finished, the body in Shi Lian's grip slackened. Long Ying died just like that, his eyes still wide open. Shi Lian hadn't the chance to react before Wu Ming said, "Your Highness, he's dead." "Dead?" Shi Lian wondered. He looked down, and Long Ying's eyes were already going dull. He really had died. "How is he just dead?" Shi Lian mumbled. He hadn't done anything to Long Ying yet. How could he be dead? And now that he thought about it, Long Ying had died fairly fulfilled and happy. His revenge against Shenle was complete, and his family so close at hand, he was prepared to immediately reunite with them in the underworld. He had suffered enough torment in the world of the living, so death was likely a form of release, an end to it. But Shi Lian was left with nothing to avenge himself upon. His chest was filled with grievance and indignation, and in the end they coalesced into a single emotion. Hate. How despicable. How absolutely despicable. Long Ying had stopped moving, but the two faces on his chest seemed to know that their host was dead, and suddenly started to cry. Wah! 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 The noise was piercing, worse than the sound of nails scratching on gold and silver plates. Shi Lian was already going mad with fury. He pulled out the black sword, ready to strike, and shut them up, when Wu Ming swiftly drew his saber. Shing! The saber's light flashed past him, and Long Ying's corpse was instantly chopped to pieces. Tens of pieces, hundreds of pieces, flesh and blood splattered everywhere. Shi Lian hadn't even moved before he was overtaken. "Who told you to do that?" he questioned coldly. "There was no need to dirty your Highness's hands," Wu Ming replied. Just then, urgent footsteps sounded outside the door. "Uncle!" a young boy's voice called. "Who?" Shi Lian turned around and saw that the doors of the palace hall were wide open. A boy 10 or so years old was standing there and gazing at the scene in front of him. His face had been full of smiles at first, but they turned to shock when he entered and saw the gore covering the floor. Shi Lian was unmoved. "Who are you?" The boy stared back. Then his gaze fell upon the chunks of dead body all around the room. "Uncle!" More people began calling to him from outside. "Your Royal Highness, don't run off. The king said you can't run around in the palace. Please don't make things difficult for me in the middle of the night." Royal Highness? Long Ying's son was dead, and this boy had called him uncle, so he must be the one Long Ying had named Crown Prince of Yong'an. The reality of the situation seemed to have dawned on the young Crown Prince, and he cried out in terror, "Ghosts! There are ghosts! Somebody!" He hadn't screamed more than a few words before Wu Ming struck him in the neck. The Crown Prince of Yong'an lost consciousness and fell into the blood pooling on the floor. However, his screams had already reached those outside, and a commotion began to arise. "What? Did you hear that? Guards! Guards!" Shilian's eyes flickered, and Wu Ming inclined his head, indicating he would take care of it. He flashed away. In an instant, all the noise outside was choked off. Exiting the great hall, Shilian saw many guards strewn about on the ground. Wu Ming stood at the center of the fallen crowd, his thin, delicate saber dripping with blood. He had finished them all with a single strike. More noise came from far in the distance, and a new batch of guards arrived amidst shouts of "Protect the king!" and "Protect his highness!" Shilian coldly turned around and ignored them completely. Sure enough, less than a second later, those voices vanished completely, cut down like a harvest faced with a scythe. Soon after, Wu Ming silently caught up to him. Shilian inclined his head. "Burn the palace." Wu Ming bowed his head. "Yes, sir." Roaring flames blazed to the sky. Two tall, slender figures stood before the raging fire. Their shadows on the ground writhed and contorted ceaselessly, pulling and twisting, changing shape. The attendants within the palace of Yong'an were jolted awake by the havoc, and the air was choked by the cries and curses of those putting out the fires and those making their escape. It was very much the same scene as when the palace of Shenle had been set ablaze. "Your Highness, what do you want to do next?" the black-clad warrior asked. "To Lang'er Bay," the white-clothed man said in a chilly voice. Let me drink. Before the kingdom of Shenle fell, Shilian had visited Lang'er Bay countless times. Every time he went, it was to create rain to save the people. His body and heart were always exhausted, his steps leaden. This time, he was visiting for a completely different reason, and his body was light. Having survived the drought and gained the support of the new king, Lang'er Bay had been revived, lively and bustling. Streets and alleys were busy and joyful, the people cheerful and happy. It was a complete reversal from the misery of years ago. Only one place was still as miserable as before, and that was the temple of the Crown Prince of Shenle. No one would come to a broken-down temple of the Crown Prince, so Shilian chose it as his place to rest. Right now, he was meditating within the hall. The vengeful spirits should have quickly found a host in Longying, the target of Shilian's revenge. Yet because he was already dead, they still struggled in agony, wailing and screeching relentlessly at Shilian. Frowning, Shilian waved them away with his eyes closed. "Just wait. Don't be impatient. I will allow all of you to find release." And then a voice called out, "Your Highness." Shilian opened his eyes. He saw Wu Ming before him, one knee on the ground. And that's where that ends. Bro,
Interesting.
his fucking baby and his wife were on his body, and then he just dies in Shilian's arms. He doesn't even get his revenge.
Typical.
Now imagine you're reading these fucking chapters back to back. It's just never ending, bro.
It's never ending. Traumatizing.